Hey guys, welcome back to Coach Hall Writes. Today's video is specifically for AP Lang teachers. We're going to be talking about how to plan for the rest of your school year. For me, the first step is to set my goals. And so I see this as a two-step process. First, I ask myself what goals I have for my students for the remainder of the course. And then I ask myself what goals I have for my students for the big picture of education. So we're talking like college and career and also life skills. The next step for me is I assess my students' needs. Now, I start by thinking about all of my students collectively, and then I work my way down to individual students. So thinking about all my classes combined, I ask myself which skills have my students mastered. Now, to figure this out, I look at the different rubrics for each of the three essays. So for instance, I might ask myself, do my students know how to write a defensible thesis for an argument essay? Do they know how to include specific evidence? Do they know how to have commentary that explains that evidence? So I use the language of the rubric to create a bit of a checklist. And then I ask myself, okay, have they mastered it? And if the answer is no, then is it because I haven't taught it yet? Or is it because I need to reteach it? Because some of these skills, especially the harder ones, it's not like a one and done situation. You have to revisit those skills. So then after doing that, I focus on individual students. And one of the techniques that's worked for me in the past has been to figure out who are my borderline students. So basically what I do is I look at how they've done throughout the year and I ask myself, okay, which students are kind of on that border of maybe a 2 or a 3 composite for the exam. So maybe on a bad day, they'll get a 2, but on a good day, they'll get a 3. And then I ask myself, okay, what is that student's weakness? What can I do to help that student so that they can have the best possible testing experience the day they take the exam? So it's not that I'm showing favoritism, it's not that I'm ignoring the other students, but you really sometimes want to focus on the kids that you can move because you want to make sure you're giving them the tools that they need to be successful. Another way to assess your students' needs is to survey them. I personally like to use Google Forms because you can do different types of questions. So for instance, you could do those check boxes and basically say, which skills do you feel you've mastered? Or you could flip the question and say, which skills do you feel you need to work on the most between now and the exam? You could also break it down and do like a 1 to 5 scale, asking them how comfortable they feel with it or whether or not they feel like they've mastered it, because that lets you know how they feel they're doing. But also, I always try to include at least one open-ended question where they can tell me how they think they're doing in their own words, because that's always very insightful as well. Now that you've assessed your students' needs, the next step is to create a plan of attack. So depending on your teaching situation this year, the plan of attack might look a little different. So if you are doing a virtual class, or maybe you only see your students on certain days, you might want to ask yourself how many class periods you have remaining, because if you just think of it as a number of weeks, that might not be an accurate representation of the time you actually have with your students. You also want to remind yourself of which skills are a priority, because if the goal is for the students to be successful on the exam and to prioritize those skills you truly feel they need, you want to make sure you're focusing on which skills are going to have the most impact. Once you've prioritized your skills, you want to ask yourself, how can I create lessons and assessments that are going to be meaningful and valuable, but ones that aren't going to add unnecessary stress to my students or to me as a teacher? I learned last year when we pivoted to virtual instruction that sometimes simpler assignments that are truly meaningful are better than those bigger assignments that have a lot of extra fluff. So really focus on the value you're giving your students. I'd like to invite you to join my AP Lang teacher email list. You'll find the link to this in the description box below. So when you sign up for that list, you will receive my top 5 tips for teaching rhetorical analysis. I also send either weekly or bi-weekly emails. It kind of depends on how life goes, where I share tips and resources just as a way to connect with fellow AP Lang teachers. So I would love it if you would check out the link in the description box below. That way we can work together to prepare our students for this year's AP Lang exam.